Now I'd like to introduce Fred Bissinger, another friend from SHRM, and he is Regional Managing Member of the Nashville, Tennessee office of Wimberly Lawson, where he joined the firm after his military service in 1999. Fred has served in several capacities with Tennessee SHRM as well as Middle Tennessee SHRM, and will be the 2015 MT-SHRM Diversity and Inclusion Committee Director, and I will ask him to introduce our panel of guests today.
All right, thank you, Beth, and thank you to everybody for coming today. This is, if you look at the diversity and inclusion spectrum, you got about a gazillion different interests that people have. Well, veterans and in helping veterans transition into civilian society is my passion, because I've worked in the military, I've worked as a civilian, I've had to make the transition. I understand some of the difficulties that military members have in making a transition. And I told Beth that this is something that I think that we can really help the community with by understanding how to translate one language to another language. So what we're going to do today, we're going to have a panel discussion, which means I'm going to call on some of you, especially if I see you nodding your heads and falling off to sleep, okay? We have microphones out there, so you can feel free to ask any questions you like. This is a non-attribution setting, which means you can pretty much say or do anything you want because nobody's going to hold it against you. I will tell you this is being recorded, so you might want to keep it within a certain range. Okay. Here's the panel. We have Todd Johnson, is Major, U.S. Army retired. We have Tom Stoquert right here. He's also Army retired. At the end, Ray Swatzel, U.S. Army retired, and second to my left, Jim Howard, a fellow Squid. So at least we got some love for the Navy here today. A lot of Army folks. All right, so we have, going down the line, Ray is off active duty, and he and his wife both are at MTSU, okay? Todd has translated into the financial services industry. Jim has likewise translated into the financial services industry, and Tom is a fraud investigator with the state of Tennessee. So, with that, gentlemen, will you please, starting with Ray, give the audience a little bit of your background in the military and any comments, opening comments you'd like to make.
Well, my name's Raymond Huntley. I had joined the Army between my junior and senior year of high school when I went to basic training. After completion of high school, I went on active duty and stayed and remained on active duty, completing out my 22-year career. Me and my wife both are ex-service members. I, like I said, served 22 years. My wife served 8 years. We're both taking advantage of the GI Bill benefits here at MTSU. I am studying construction management, residential home building, and land development. My wife is currently studying marketing. Neither one of us are from the Middle Tennessee area. My wife is from northern Wisconsin. I'm from upstate New York. But we enjoy and have enjoyed many aspects of returning here to Middle Tennessee. We were stationed up at Fort Campbell for about 4.5 years. We were stationed up at Fort Campbell for about 4.5 years, where we moved to Germany and then Italy, and then where I retired out of Italy.
Okay.
My name's Todd Johnson. As he said, I work for Edward Jones now. I grew up in a military family. I've got grandparents that served in the Navy, going back to World War II. Dad was in the Coast Guard. I started right out of high school. I enlisted in the Naval Reserve. And when I joined the Army, much to the chagrin of my grandfathers and father, I, like the deputy mayor said, was a knuckle dragger for about 4 years, serving in a Ranger unit. I went to flight school, served as a warrant officer, and then I went to OCS, and I retired as a major after flying helicopters for about 29 years of total service. Like I said, I'm a financial advisor at Edward Jones now. One of the things that I kind of want to key on today, if we can, is that hiring process. The financial services industry was very open to letting a veteran in the door, just to talk to me. As far as the culture, Edward Jones as an example, they've got a great team and service-oriented culture, so it very easily translated to what I spent most of my adult life doing. One of the things that I would say, and this kind of dovetails with what several folks have said already, is just keeping the door open for vets. It's not out of pity by any stretch or out of that we deserve it, but that our skills don't always translate. I flew helicopters for 20 years. It doesn't have anything to do with what I do now. So I would just ask that whether it's, a box that you can check on an online application or a paper application, most of you folks, I'm sure, are human resources managers. You can look at a resume for about 30 seconds or less and tell whether or not it's worth looking at for a minute or 5 and actually calling somebody in. So that would be my recommendation. Just make sure there's a mechanism in place so that you do take a look at that resume. And lastly, I was trained to fly and lead, but I was never trained to plan and coordinate major training events. I was never trained specifically to manage $250 million worth of equipment or a $250 million flying hour budget. So why do I share that? Those are things that service members bring to the table. They might have a very specific job set, but we routinely go out and do things that we're not trained to do. You give us a job and we're going to figure out how to do it, or we're going to ask the questions to figure out how to do it. Thanks.
My name's Jim Howard. So I did 12 years in the 12 years. Can you hear me? 12 years in the Navy. I had broken service, so from 98 to 2002, and then I went to college at the University of Kentucky, went back to the Navy from 2005 to 2013, late 2013, all of which I was in Special Forces. I work at Fifth Third Bank now. Prior to being at Fifth Third, I was at Investment Bank based in New York City, but I worked in Salt Lake City. And the one thing I would hit on today is how difficult the transition is, or was, I guess. We kind of passed that. But so I did, what's arguably, extremely difficult training and all of that, right? And everyone sort of buys into that level of difficulty. But I tell you, it was very difficult transitioning, not only on myself, but my wife, and I knew, an 18-month-old. And my options were stay in the military for essentially ever, retire, or take the leap and get out. At a point in my career when I was on a very strong track, it could have continued, up the ladder, but we made that decision. And so with it comes a cut in pay. You take a 50%, it's about a 50% cut in pay, and I was E7 Navy SEAL with a master's degree in business, and you take a step back. And so it was difficult to first land the job, and then once you do land it, now you've got your family that has to move, and so you leave your friends and family that you've been with for 12 years, you leave a city that you've lived in, and you move to a place that's, foreign. It's so different, and if it's difficult for me, I can only imagine what it's like for a guy who did 4 or 5 years. His resume, if we laid them next to each other, wouldn't look anything, you would honestly pick mine up and give me a call, most likely. It was the response. His would probably get tossed, but it's extremely difficult once he lands a job to actually transition. So I would stress that it's hands down the hardest thing I ever did, hands down.
My name is Thomas Stoquert. I'm currently with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance. I would definitely like to say I totally agree with Jim that when I transitioned out of service, my time in service goes back from 88 to 96. So I got out at a time it was much earlier than I think all these guys, but the transition was probably harder then. I see that there's a lot of inner workings and apparatus that's being built to help veterans, and I'm very happy for that. It's a wonderful thing to see. I think Lieutenant Colonel here that spoke earlier, it's just a fantastic to have all of that put in place now for the veterans, and then to have you guys here, to be able to speak to you so you can understand from our perspective as veterans the difficulty level. And I think somebody said earlier that there was never a class on how to interview. So I'm going to go back to what I did in the military. I was a counterintelligence special agent. Really isn't much to say about what I did. I did a lot of very interesting things at the time. And I met a woman, decided to get out of the service after 8 years, and I was a promotable sergeant, and I said, I kind of felt like I had a protected world that I was in, and I needed to just go ahead and shatter that and move forward with being a human being again, instead of kind of the robot that you get to be being in the service. So I ended up getting out. I went from Maryland. I was stationed out of Fort Meade, Maryland, most of my career except a year in South Korea. And I went down to Texas, where I had a sister who lived, and decided I would start my job search there. And what a nightmare it was. I went through a TAP program. That's a transition assistance program the military had at the time. It was very, very poor. It was one of the most ridiculous resumes I've ever probably seen in my life. And I took that resume and I went down there and tried my best to get a job doing exactly what I'm doing now, interestingly enough. And I could not. Maybe I was up against, I'm a New Yorker, I'm a native New Yorker, and so maybe I was up against an old boy network that, wouldn't give me a chance. I don't know. I can't give you the answer on what happened, but I could not find work. When I finally did, it was as a private investigator doing surveillance for workers' comp fraud, and I did that for 2 years. But the point is that as an employer looking at me, I understand what happened. I walked in there, I didn't know how to interview, I had a bad resume. Why would I have hired me? But now I'm fast forwarding literally 20 years from the time I got out, and I see a great deal of change. So before I was a Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance fraud investigator, I worked for the Department of Labor right here in Murfreesboro. And I started there as a veteran outreach specialist, doing nothing but helping veterans find jobs. Now, I drew from my experience back in '96, and so it meant a great deal to me personally to see that I did everything in my power to be able to assist veterans in finding jobs. So much so that I spent all kinds of extra hours and additional duties doing what I could to include the benefits of having, Beth and Colonel Davidson here. I loved the fact that we had this inner working between the Department of Labor and the Chamber of Commerce and even the mayor's office to try to help veterans. And what we did with this this effort with the Warrior Workforce Initiative is just unprecedented. This is something that should move forward across the state and I hope across the country. But what I would like to finish with here, and I apologize for taking so much time, is simply this. When you have a veteran come before you, just remember that even though things have changed and they've gotten a tremendous amount better, there's still a lot of improving to be done. And being able to transition what we did to the civilian side is very difficult to do. But if you have, as an employer and a human resource manager, if you have a knowledge that, wait a minute, this guy was a veteran, let's take a second look. Just give it a second look. What did he do in the service? And if you can't get that answer from the resume, understand it's not their fault. A lot of us, I think while I was at the Department of Labor in 5 months, I wrote almost 60 resumes because every resume I saw was just an absolute nightmare, just like mine was when I got out. So anyway, that's pretty much my experience.
And Thomas, your story is right in line with mine, because I was active duty 93 through 97, and you would think, or at least hope, that somebody with a law degree who passed 2 bar exams could, speak the English language a little bit, maybe write a few sentences that are coherent. And after 5 years in active duty, when I was trying to transition out to civilian law firms, I wrote a resume and I sent it to my brother, who's an attorney, and he said, "Dude, what in the hell is this?" It's like reading a Chinese menu. The dates are backwards. You have all this language about all this stuff you did that's really cool, but nobody's going to know what it is. And I said to my brother, well, don't people understand from my resume, I did 3 years of criminal litigation, I tried a bunch of jury trials? Doesn't that resonate? He's like, yeah, kinda, but you're going to have to figure out a way to make that so somebody understands it. And I said, well, what about my second tour working as in-house counsel for a Special Operations Command? I said, I did more cool stuff there in that time than I'll ever do again in the rest of my life. He's like, yeah, I know that. But what you have on paper, nobody's going to understand that you were an in-house counsel helping a client solve very difficult problems, okay? So when I think of an E4, E5, E6 getting out and going through that process now, after what I did as an 03 with 5 years of experience after having graduated college and gone through law school, all that education and training I had and the struggle I had trying to put together a resume and go to an interview and not just want to talk about all the cool training I had running around the woods, shooting weapons, and all this great high-speed, low-drag stuff I got to be around, that was a huge mind shift change. So I'm in the same boat as you were and as others here. So it transitions from everybody, no matter how junior they might be, to how senior an officer they might be. There is a huge language difference, experiential difference, going from the military community to the civilian community. I also wanted to, before we start opening this up for some questions, a couple of points I wanted to make. I'm an employment defense lawyer, and I told some of these guys earlier, my second day, I think it was my second day after I got assigned to my first duty station, I was assigned to represent a tailhook client back in '93. For those of you who are old enough and might remember what a fiasco the tailhook deal was, I've done that type of work my entire career. It suits my personality. I think I'm good at it, but it's also kind of like mud wrestling. You're always dealing with people's problems and craziness. So when I look at my clients and the problems that they encounter across the board, almost inevitably, their issues, their employee-related issues, boil down to 2 fundamental elements. One is poor leadership, and 2 is a lack of teamwork. Well, if you are recruiting people who understand leadership, be it from the back of the pack, the middle of the pack, or the front of the pack, who has better leadership training than the military? In my view, none. Okay? If you're talking about teamwork, again, from if you're starting at the bottom of the ladder, or you're in the middle of the pack, or you're at the top of the pack, being able to work in a team environment is simply the difference between life and death for most of these people in the military. So if they have that skill under situations and circumstances that they operate in the military world, ask yourself, do you think that might transition to the civilian world? And if you have a lack of either leadership ability at any level or you need teamwork, then you know that there are people coming off of active duty who are going to be able to help you. And one other point I want to make before I start with questioning, there was a question earlier about the PTSD scenario. I deal with this issue on a regular basis, consulting and counseling my clients on how to deal with employees, veterans and non-veterans, with mental, emotional, psychological issues. Okay, and that's like a 500-pound gorilla in the room. I've had employers say to me, Fred, we really want to do the patriotic thing, but we're really concerned about having some guy who's going to go off his rocker and start shooting the place up. And I'm like, well, have you looked at the statistics about workplace violence in this country? And can you tell, that what majority of the workplace incidents are caused by people who do not have a military background versus those who do have a military background, all right? it's obvious that the fact that somebody was in the military and they may have some residual mental, emotional, psychological issues, that's really not a whole lot different than your population as a whole. Those issues exist across the board. And so in terms of dealing with them, you're going to deal with a veteran who has that type of issue the same way you're going to deal with any other civilian employee who has that type of issue. The ADA has a certain procedure that you work through, and the bottom line is your focus as an employer needs to be, how do I help this employee succeed? Okay? There may be a lot of different ways we're going to go about helping him or her succeed. The issue is not, can we fix their broken brain? The issue is, how do we get them the help that they need and put them in situations in which they are going to be successful so we can capitalize on the skill set that they have and use it to our collective advantage. All right, and if anybody here wants to talk to me offline on that issue, I deal with it on a daily basis. I'm happy to talk to you about it. All right, starting up, any questions in the audience? I see some friendly faces, so I might start calling on you. Any questions? Rosina, you got to have a question. Come on. All right, Dennis, come on, help me out here. Start us off. Okay, all right. All right, well, I want to start with Todd, because Todd, you and I were talking about this concept of an open door during the search process. And I know, because I help my clients with their job applications, and I get this question about, how do we ask questions about veterans, what they did, et cetera, without asking questions that are likely to lead to them talking about disability, so that we're asking questions that are illegal. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts, because now that you've transitioned into Edward Jones, I'm sure that you're helping them figure out how to identify, competent military people who want to transition into the financial services industry.
Thanks, Fred. I will start with my experience as I transitioned, and this is why I brought it up. Probably 2, maybe 3 of the non-financial services applications that I filled out, there was no identification of whether or not I was a veteran or not. I assumed that my resume and a well-written cover letter would articulate that. Well, because so much is online now, that online filter process, nobody ever even looked at my resume or my cover letter, because I didn't have, for example, franchise experience. But I would take that one step further. I could have taken the easy road, because I managed, my last job in command, I managed folks doing business at 1 or 2 locations across the country, as well as multiple locations, overseas, in addition to the folks that I managed at Fort Campbell. Is that a franchise? No. Could I have checked that box? Probably. But that's the level of integrity that I think most of us bring to the table. So that's kind of where I'm coming from when I say that. Had there been a veteran box there, and you could have spent 5 minutes talking to me like Edward Jones and Northwest Mutual and some other folks did, I could have articulated that to you in an honest manner, as opposed to checking a box that I didn't feel comfortable checking. Does that make sense? Why is that important? For all the things that I said before. When you take that time, my interview with Edward Jones, my face-to-face interview, there was probably 3 phone interviews, 2 exercises, if you will, but the face-to-face interview was probably 2 hours, because I probably spent half of that time trying to explain my resume to the interviewer. Not in a bad way. She was asking all the right questions. So, and I don't know if it was Fred or one of the other presenters earlier, it's asking those open-ended questions of veterans. Your resume says you flew helicopters. Well, what else did you do? You can't sit in a helicopter and fly that for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. So, that's kind of where I'm coming from in that regard. It's just kind of keeping that door open just a crack. So that you got the opportunity to talk to, somebody who's got those Army values that we talked about earlier.
Go ahead.
If you don't mind, I'll add on to that. So I think it's important, if we think that the problem is solved by being more diligent on the systems that we currently have in process, in place, the employment systems, the resume screening software, and however it is that you basically screen your initial pool of candidates, the 100,000 resumes you get down to 1,000 are worth a phone call. The solution probably doesn't exist in there because we'll never be able to communicate from the veteran side. We don't know what you're looking for, what keywords that you're searching for. We can't really pull that. Maybe it's in a job description, et cetera. It really, I think, success will be driven by a new platform or a new channel that allows people like me, us, to get to the final stage, which is an interview. And I think when you have people sit in front of you and get interviewed, it typically will go well. When I transitioned out in 2013, I did an internship program before I transitioned out at Goldman Sachs Investment Bank in New York City, and they had a program called the Veterans Integration Program, and what it was in its second year. The first year they did, I think, 23 applicants. The second year with me, there was like 48 spots. Now it's up to 80. But they effectively realized that they were getting a lot of referrals from outside of their channel, their core recruiting schools, and the referrals were solid, and they were great people that were just coming in all of these weird ways, which I'm assuming you see the same thing. And so they said, well, let's dedicate some resources and create a program that allows us to, in the right setting, pull all of the applicants that we would get, but we look at them through a clear lens and say, these are people that meet the needs of the organization. And on top of that, you have other military people that are at the firm look at the resumes, so they're not reading Greek. It makes sense. They can screen the resumes and say this person's lying, or this is trash, or whatever. And ultimately, you get I think why they were so successful and why it's grown is that it's not a commitment to give you a job. It's a commitment to give you a foot in the door and a chance to have experience. And so both of us can do an interview that lasts 8 weeks as opposed to one that lasts 2 hours or a full day. And at the end of it, I benefit because I did an internship at whatever school or whatever program or company. You benefit because you got 8 weeks to take a look at me to see if you want me. Neither of us are out anything. And out of the 40 people, they made offers to about 35 of us, and it was a mutually beneficial program. So I think the solution is not selecting a box or applying your filters, but it's thinking creatively and designing programs that fit.
And Ray, take that from the educational perspective, because you get out off active duty, you have a skill set, and you're looking to transition it through getting a degree. Tell me how that worked for you.
Well, basically, what it boils down to is I was a maintenance manager for a brigade fleet, which means me and my crews, we manage maintenance of everything from weapons to vehicles to engineer equipment over a broad spectrum. Now, trying to transition that into construction management, I think for me was looking more at the logistics of it. It takes a lot to bring those maintenance parts into theater, into those environments, and to distribute them. A lot of tracking of equipment. So when I was looking at the construction management field and moving into the construction management field, I was looking more at the management piece, working with others and large groups of other people to make sure that we collectively get or accomplish a task, and also the logistics piece.
So let me follow up on that. So you go into this program, you're probably a little bit older than most of your classmates. You've been around the world a little bit more than most of your classmates. You don't necessarily have any sort of a pipeline of training that is, you punch, it's check A box, check B box. But how do you feel at this point when you're in the program? How do you stack up given the experience that you've had?
For me, it's been, I definitely see a level of maturity that is not there with the rest of the students. Some of the ideas that they the way that they conduct their schooling and go about finishing their degree. You know, whether it's they put off their homework because they have a party to go to or whatever. That's kind of what I see. It's very different for me. I don't follow them very often, and I do sit back in class and we talk about, for example, in my music class, where we're supposed to be getting a humanities and learning about other cultures, and I sit back and I listen to everybody talk about their experiences, and I know that I've been to 29 countries around the world, and a lot of these experiences that they're talking about, I probably could tell them many stories about what has happened to me in the humanities aspect of it. So it's been a challenge for me. It's been a challenge for my wife, for us to go to school and full time and be able to come home every day but it's something that we enjoy.
And Thomas, let me come back to you now. You've been, like me, you've been in the civilian side going on 20 years now. You have the past experiences that you draw on. How do you transition them, even still at this point, into your day-to-day, job functions and wherever you're trying to move the department that you work for? How do you apply it?
Well, I think it's beneficial. I think one of the things that I think all of us will agree, and the veterans in this audience and the active duty folks that are here, and I think we would agree, we don't punch a clock. And that's, I have never been a clock puncher, clock watcher. I've just, and that's from the military. That's, that wasn't something we did. You just didn't do it. When the job was done, or when we felt like we just couldn't move on for the rest of the day, we walked off. And we did not have that kind of atmosphere, at least not in what I did. And I don't know that there's a lot that do. There's some that, there's some jobs in the military where, you're on a flight deck and, you can only be there a certain amount of time because, they worry that you may make a mistake. But for the jobs that I had, there was never a time where I punched a clock. And so to transition that now to my current employer as well as my past employers, that means that you're going to get out of me every single ounce of energy that I can. And I notice a difference between me and those who have not been in the service or have never served, because I tend to care more about the job than anyone around me. And that's never, I don't know if you guys you find that with you, I don't know, but I know for me, I've never been in a job where, I've ever concerned myself about looking at the clock. And I've got a guy that I work with, in fact, he was a Rakasan right up at Fort Campbell. He served 4 years as a 11 Bravo infantryman. And he is just exactly the same kind of guy I am. I mean, just it doesn't matter. You finish with that day and you feel like, okay, I can move on. But nobody's looking at a clock. And thank goodness I tend to work for somebody that, understands that. And he's a civilian. He's an attorney, actually. But he's a civilian and he's never served. But my goodness, he has a tremendous amount of respect for what we've done and the service that we've given to our country. So I think when you have a military person who I think, of course, there's always two sides to every story, right? But so there's going to be some guys that mess up. But again, that we're 1% of the population, those who've served. And of that 1%, there's going to be a percent of that 1% that don't subscribe to those guidelines, that maybe lack integrity or have issues with those kinds of things. But the vast majority of us are way above average in those lines. And I think that's one of the things that you gain as an employer by pulling someone from the service into your organization.
All right, let me transition to a different topic. Jim, you had raised this issue about, when we're looking to hire somebody, and I hire myself, and I'm always, looking at what job experience does somebody have. I need people to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Do they have experience to do it? I'm checking that skill set box. But those are sort of the hard skills that people bring to the table. But as I alluded to earlier, that the biggest issue I encounter with failed relationships or problematic employees tends to be a failure in leadership and or a failure of an ability to work in a team setting and be a good teammate. There's this whole soft side of the equation. So, and I know that's something that you have mentioned to me. So talk about that a little bit, please.
I think that's what you get for free, essentially. You get a decade's worth or 20 years worth of skills that take that long to learn. And I would proposition that any job that you're looking to hire for, outside of physicist, is not that hard. I really do believe that there's nothing that's outside of anyone's, assuming they're of average intelligence, capabilities of learning. And I think what you get, so on top of the soft skills that can't be taught in a year, the person, when you hire them, has to show up with those skills. You're not going to teach them how to care, be punctual, all of those things that really matter at meaningful positions in a company. I think you get those for free. I'm trying to think of how to phrase it. But a college degree is sometimes used as the qualifier, and young people are supposed to get the soft skills while they go to college for 4 years. But there's a lot of military people who didn't go to college yet have those same exact soft skills that you're looking for. So, again, you get those for free. We can learn any of the technical skills. Me specifically, I did, along with him, nighttime raids around the world and, captured people in their beds. And that's not something that you can, if nobody's hiring me to do that, unfortunately. Right? There's not a big demand for that.
Isn't Blackwater hiring? Oh, sorry, they're not Blackwater anymore.
Not a big demand for that in Middle Tennessee. So I, went into banking, got the technical skills through some education, but ultimately the things I'm doing now, so I'm at Fifth Third Bank and I've been there for 7 months, the things I'm doing now are the equivalent of something someone who's been at the bank for 25 years is doing. We're leading the same deals, we're arranging transactions, we're doing all of those things because it's not difficult. All the other things, enable you to learn the simple technical skills.
Todd, you haven't been in the special operations community, that concept of teamwork and the, again, Jim's term, the soft skills that really are important in civilian society. Because, well, actually, I don't want you to coach them up too much on this, because if you do, it might mean a decrease in business for me, which wouldn't be good. But talk about that.
I will start this by saying, everybody asks, especially I've only been out for about 18 months, do you miss it? Well, yeah, sure, you miss the excitement, but, you can only go raid somebody's house over in Afghanistan so many times before it gets a little old, or missing your son's first 10 birthdays or whatever. One of those soft skills, and, I hear from, where my wife works and the leadership aspect, it's about relationships. That's what I do. That's what he does. I would argue that that's what all of us do, especially if y'all are, human resource managers. I had 108 soldiers that I managed my last command. I might not have known every last one of them's child's name, but I knew that they had 2 daughters and a son. And taking care of them at that level, they knew that I had their back no matter what. And that, I think, is what you get when you hire one of us or someone like us. It's somebody that gets that relationship. I think too often the military paradigm that folks that haven't served of what a leader is what's the drill sergeant's name in Full Metal Jacket? He does commercials now. He's the prototypical Marine drill sergeant. That's not what the Army teaches or the military teaches for leadership. I went through a business management program about halfway through my career, finished my degree on active duty. They taught the exact same things in business school for leadership that we taught in the military. We just speak a different language, same skill set. In the civilian community, they talk management by walking around. At least 15, 20 years ago they did. But that's exactly what we're taught in the military. You can't lead your folks if you don't know them, if you don't see them, if you don't go spend time with them. So I think that's one of those soft skills, if you will, those intangibles. That's not something that you can put on a resume very easily. But you can see how it translates to all of our lives, just in that simple thing about relationships. I transitioned my relationships as a leader to now I lead clients, whether that's to their retirement, to getting their kids through college, whatever the case may be. Just like these other folks do similarly. Does that answer your question?
Fred?
Question? Stand up so everybody can hear you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Colonel George talked about it earlier in our job descriptions and how to tailor those so the military are comfortable applying for the jobs. Like a bachelor's degree. What I've done in the past is we've had a bachelor's degree or equivalent amount of experience. And we looked at it, experience is a 2-to-1 ratio. 2 years of experience is 1 year of education. Can you kind of give me a conversion rate of how military experience would relate to education?
I've got a 20-year-old brother who's in his second or third year at the University of Kentucky, and I would probably say his 4-year degree is worth about a year of military experience. He's immature. I hear him go to class. He's a 4.0, 3.8 student, but as far as what he's learning and bringing to the table for an employer, it's minimal. I would say that. I know the question is, what's the ratio? It's equivalent. If you'd served a time in the military, you should just check it off and say, yeah, the kid's qualified. He's got a bachelor's degree. It's really, yeah, you got a bachelor's, got a master's. Can I tell you anything that I learned in my bachelor's degree? I can write a coherent sentence, have a coherent thought, but it's probably age, not necessarily education. And you can teach people, again, these technical skills that you need. If writing is a big component of the job, anyone can learn it. You just spend a little bit of time. But I'd say, it's a 1-to-1, right? They do a stint in the military. I would check it off and move on, because I think that's what you're doing, right? When you look at a bachelor's degree, that's where the conversation stops about what I did in college. If I was a seasoned employee, I would say he's got a bachelor's, check. What else does he have, right? So that's what I'd say.
Ray, you want to jump in on that since you are in the educational pipeline?
Right. I would say that it's different for everybody. Just like with the civilian world, you have some people that are not as mature as others. Same thing goes for the military. My wife served 8 years. To give you an example, right now she is in the marketing program. She also works for and does analyst duties basically for Burke here at MTSU, and she's also in the top 5% of her class. So, how does it transition? It's different for everybody. I'm not in the top 5% of my class, but she definitely is, and I think it depends on their experiences that they've had in the military. So.
Sir?
Good morning, gentlemen. Keith Huber, thank you for your service. My question to you is, as you went through the hiring process, did you express a desire to then become the leadership of the organization you were joining? Did they offer you that future potential, and now that you've been there, do you see yourselves as the leadership, improving the health and the effectiveness of the organizations that you belong to? Thank you.
I explicitly stated when I came here to Tennessee that I expected in the next, decade, I don't know what the time frame is to be sitting in the chair, the person across from me who's at the time CEO of the bank. And simply that was my drive, I guess, and a lot of us join programs or places that there's potential upside, because there are contracting opportunities when you come out of the military that are simply you step in and you make quite a bit of money, but you're at that level and at that level of responsibility as an individual contributor for the rest of your life or until you're tired of doing it. And so a lot of people look for the opportunity to join a firm or join a company that has upside. And so I explicitly stated that's my goal.
And did you find that Fifth Third responded that was part of the drill?
Yeah, absolutely. It's expected, I think, when you hire somebody, you expect more out of them than what you're hiring them for. I think I'm not a hiring manager, but I would assume that's the case.
Anybody?
Can you hear me? There we go. Zach Odell, 3rd Ranger, 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. One of the things that I've seen as far as from my own experience of transitioning was that a lot of the companies didn't have the contact on the job postings. They didn't have a way of actually the submitter to be able to contact that company to follow up on his resume. And that happened, it took me, I got out in 2012, and it took me 6 years before I actually got to the position I'm in right now. Started out at the company at the low end. I was just a mapper, and now I've been with the company for 3 years, and now I'm running the company. I'm a business manager of the company, but the only reason I was able to get this position or to get the interview was they actually had the contact name and contact phone number, and I was able to follow up. And my question is, why is, along with that checkbox of whether you're a veteran or not, why not also have that contact name and information for them to follow up? Because I know that that's going to be the military, from a military standpoint, you're going to want to follow up and find out what's going on. And I feel that every other service member would do the same thing.
And Todd, I think you spoke to this point in your opening comments.
No, I would agree, and I spent the first 4 years of my career in 275, so Rangers lead the way. Thank you. It's like I said before, I think it's just keeping the door open, whether that's opening it enough for me to reach out to you or vice versa. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't know that I can say it any better. I know there are challenges out there in the civilian labor force, civilian workforce. And you can only put so many people in an HR department. Lean is the word of the day today. Is there a risk of putting your phone number and email address on a job application website? Absolutely, because the floodgate's going to open. I recognize that. So I would agree with Jim as well. I don't know what the right mechanism is. I think it's a system. You got to have some type of system in place to find these folks, not because they're veterans, but because they're the best employee that you can hire, whether he's got veteran behind his name or not. I think that's absolutely what it boils down to. But I ran into the same problem. The jobs that I thought I would be really good at and that I thought I would enjoy and be able to carry my leadership forward, there was no contact information. They never even looked at my resume. So
I had the same experience applying to law firms. It was sort of like my resume, even if I knew people, had friends sending resumes to the hiring partner, it fell into a black hole, and maybe one out of 5 I'd get the courtesy of a return call, even if it was just to say, hey, we're not interested or we're not hiring. So that's not a new issue. I think it's more complicated today given the fact that a lot of this process is conducted online because that promotes many applications, and you hit the nail on the head. I know there are some HR people out there shaking their heads saying, amen, brother. Unlike if we had to return a call on everyone who submitted a resume, we'd be there 6 days a week and never get anything else done. So, other questions? All right, Rosina.
Get your
Knock
question
'em dead,
now.
kid.
All right. So I deal with a lot of companies which have issues between departments or within departments in terms of defining what a real team is. And they'll call leaders leaders even though they're more managers than they are leaders. So the one time that I had a veteran who had an issue with a company I was dealing with ended up resigning before the company was going to ask him to leave. And by the time he was referred to me and I realized what the situation was, it was too late. And I heard his story. He did actually exactly what he should have done. It was a dysfunctional company. So I would like to hear from your perspective an anecdote of what a team is, what a leader is, and your experience dealing with an organization, a company, a group that had a different perception, and what happened.
Yeah, and that is a fantastic question. So anybody who wants to jump in on that one? Not everybody at once.
I'll lead it off. I don't want to hog time.
All right, Thomas, you're elected.
Yeah, I'll do it. Okay, so you want an example, let me clarify, you want an example of a situation that we were in where it just was a dysfunctional team and what we did to fix it, or?
Just that you have your perception of what an effective team is, and they have their own perceptions.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
And I think
So-
part of her question is the use of the term leader
Okay.
versus manager, and there is a substantive difference.
So I, as I mentioned, I spent my career in the SEAL teams, and so I led and was on teams of everybody there was typically mid-20s and older, very A personality, very aggressive people, strong-willed, smart, all of those things, right? And so it's very easy to lead that group of people. You sort of just gave them a general pathway to success, and they would move the ball forward every day. And so it was very simple. And then one deployment in Afghanistan in 2011, we had some, they were basically construction people attached to us who come from a different world. And I was tasked with, we built an outstation in the middle of Afghanistan, and these guys were attached to me, and I approached it like you would. As a leader, I said, here's where we're going to go, and this is what I want done, this is what I expect, and, good luck. Because that's all you had to do with the guys I worked with. And I took them out to this outpost one time, and I take two guys, one electrician, one carpenter, and I show up, and we're going to build this thing, and we've been planning, and I thought this is going to be done in a day, and we're 2 or 3 days into it, and they spend the whole time working together. And I finally, had words with them and said, hey, this is what I expect. You're an electrician, go work on electricity. You're a carpenter, go build something. We have other people that can help you. That resulted in a workforce, or say a workplace complaint. It's funny that we're literally in the middle of Afghanistan, we're rocketed and mortared every day, we're fighting on a regular basis, and I'm standing in front of a guy explaining why somebody, lodged a complaint against me. And the issue was that I saw leadership as just as I described it, and that they should work how I think they should work, as we work in our teams. And they come from a place where it's all apprenticeship and on the job, and one guy was helping the other guy because that's just how they function. So I, stood in front and explained what was going on, and came back to the table, understood what it is they needed, and got on board. And I think that's the difference is, you lead different people different ways, different teams different ways. It doesn't, things fall apart. It happens. People issue complaints against you all the time. So ultimately, we accomplished what we were supposed to. I just had to get on board with them doing things their way, at least in the beginning. So hopefully that's an anecdotal story.
Go ahead, Todd.
I will attack this from a couple different angles. Number one, leadership. There's all kinds of different sayings and euphemisms out there. If you're a Stephen Covey fan or any of the other, Maxwell or any of the other modern leadership or effective personal operating writers, George Patton, of all people, said towards the end of World War II, much is said about loyalty from the bottom to the top, when much more should be said about loyalty from the top to the bottom. So I will tell you that if you want to foster a healthy team environment, that loyalty's got to start with the leader. And it's not the leader to his boss, it's the leader to his or her subordinates. One of the things that I always counseled my new NCOs, and probably most importantly my new lieutenants and young captains, was the biggest thing you can do to make yourself successful is to trust your subordinates implicitly, immediately, until they prove otherwise. If you come in the door and you trust them right away, they are going to trust you, and they know that you're going to listen to them. As far as a dysfunctional team to a productive team, this was back in 2002. We were getting ready to go to Afghanistan. The company I was assigned to had two, trying to think of the best way to put this that doesn't sound too rudely militaristic. They had two commanders that had ridden them hard and put them up wet for about 3 years. So this company was pretty beat down, 35 to 40 folks, an aviation company, had a female commander, my first female commander. So it was a challenge for me. I'd been in units with nothing but men most of my life. She was a great lady, though, and she was what that unit needed at the time. And when I got over myself after 3 or 4 months and understood that I was a tactical leader of the unit and she was the caring leader of that unit, we had a pretty doggone good team for 6 to 12 months of our deployment. But that was me. So I think a lot of that leadership, a lot of that team ethic is being able to look inward and go, all right, where am I as a leader failing my team, or where am I as a leader failing myself? Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'd like to tag on to that because, Rosina, you're asking a very nuanced question, and it's an excellent question because this is one of the things, that, like I said, I see this issue as a root of many problems that I'm asked to tackle. And there is a fundamental difference between leadership and management. Leadership is setting the course, and I know, for example, at Fifth Third with their diversity and inclusion program, they have leadership from the top, and everybody else on down to the tellers in the bank is online with that program because the president and CEO of the company has set the tone and he is leading that program forward by example. That is different from people who are day-to-day managers, and many times, especially in manufacturing, you get people who are managers who started on the production floor, and yeah, they're good at operating machinery, they're good at doing, tasks, but they're not, then they're promoted to a management position because they have those technical skills, but they have absolutely no training or experience in leading people, and the two are both quantitatively and qualitatively different skill sets. And so you hit a really good point on that question. Anyone else? One more question? Anyone else? Bueller?
My question is just that, do you see any unique challenges for transitioning for women veterans that may be unique from your specific challenges? Because you enter into a world that, well, it's not the same for men and women, particularly in terms of leadership. So I'm just wondering if you have any insights or anything to say about that.
I spent my whole time in a unit that had...
Hey, they can't hear you.
I spent my whole time with a unit that had only a couple women, so I'm not qualified to speak.
I'm going to put my wife on the spot here. Kim served as a Department of the Army civilian doing public affairs, for the Army for a little over 10 years. Now she works for HCA. I'm not going to divulge what hospital, that's up to her. But I'm with him. I spent most of my career in units with men only. And my gut reaction is to say that I think it's easier for women to transition out of the military, but I'm probably 180 degrees out on that. So forgive me, dear. I'm gonna deflect that to a military spouse / DA employee, former.
Thanks, babe. I would say that being a female in a military type environment has a unique set of challenges in and of itself. I spent the majority of my career in all male units. So having to establish myself as a professional, but also someone who was committed to the mission as a civilian, it was a unique experience. So I think women actually bring maybe a little more adaptability to proving themselves when it comes to new environments, and they're maybe more inclined to do so. I will tell you, for me, transitioning even from civil service, it was finding a connection to a mission I believed in, because I am very loyal as well, and finding something I believed in and I could be committed to, and an organization I felt was as committed to me as I wanted to be to them, was a bigger challenge, I think, than being a female and leaving the military.
That's excellent. All right, we will be around, so if you want to ask us questions on the side, thank you very much, everybody.